We,
Those are the days that I told Misty just in case.
I'm guessing 13.
I just, no, yes.
Do you want? Are you waiting? If they're interested in teaching, if so, that time frame works with their schedule. So, but that's the highest probability.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Come up with a new name.
Yeah.
The Isaac was always strong. He was throwing out some names. Finally, I just said, look, if you have no history, we've never done these two before. And I said, I'm going to tweak on that. Done this stuff. Yeah, you got it. That's to do.
I haven't returned everything. Tomorrow, I need to finish it.
By yourself?
Yeah, the kids are all family. It was just no night. They played at Big Island today. We had some class that went to yesterday.
But what I'm saying is, I'm giving the green light. So I would. Isaac will be there. I'm not running through you all. So I can do my sister from football first. After that, your idea is training. Which that's a possibility. Yeah, so it's he's missing a lot. So, and I won't be there because I don't.
Oh, I was.
I'll be there. Just let me know when to go.
You might be there. We'll talk. Well, you have a baseball game for starters, and technically you're not. Wednesday. She's had so technically you're not in charge. So I think you're assuming you're doing anything like that. Oh, this is the other. So you're doing. If you need wood, you're mostly sticks.
Did you see the newspaper?
I start classes tomorrow, and internship doesn't start till the fall. Yeah. That's cool, but nothing else.
I just definitely saw you.
It's just one night a week.
How's that?
It's Wednesday.
How are you? Good. Are you covering yet? Yeah, because you've been gone yesterday, today, so that gives you space to read. I actually took Sabbath today. I went to church in Maryland, and then I had a book all last week. Yeah. And then I walked out to see the car. It's just me. It'll still the hair is still
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. How was your public?
I was exhausted.
I bet you would. Follow the shot. Yeah. So I couldn't imagine. But I guess we'll find out in a few years, right?
That's right. It'll be here before you know it.
Thank you.
What's up?
How are you?
Good, how are you? Yeah, oh yeah, I'm alive. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm excited too. Yeah, I had an internship at a hospital summer, so and then I'm gonna try to get a job maybe at a craft or something on the side. In the guest house. Yeah. Actually this weekend. Yeah. I'd love to.
Not June, July. Gosh, sorry.
July.
Oh, I know. She's just not lined up. Couldn't resist.
He just figured every she was getting tired of everybody asking her who was it.
Oh, I need to know a time.
I do.
I'm not talking about
For you guys meeting. I think he assumed around 6, but doesn't
Just begun to show your greatness. begun to see your almighty hand. Is there any other one who compares to our God? No one else can do what he can. God, we hope with everything in us that we have only just begun to see your goodness and greatness and power among us. And God, we believe that we've just begun to see your almighty hand at work in our midst. And we can't wait to see what you're going to do as we trust you, as we look to you, as we listen to you, and as you lead us in your perfect way. God, we love you and we trust you, and we're just honored to be in your family. In Jesus' name, amen. Love on each other. Announcement. We hardly do anything by paper around here, and so almost everything is digital. And so just for any of you who have come along after the fact, just kind of want to catch you up to speed. If you would like to receive communication, if you go to the website that is on the screen, and you can do that right now on your phone, you will not upset me at all. And Tim, would you mind starting a stack of those cards from they're right by the door, and just everyone take one. It has the website, you can stick it on your fridge. But from there, you can both sign up to receive remind texts, which is a way we kind of quickly get out information, and also to join the Facebook group, which is a way we get out most information. So just take 1 or 6 of those. You can have as many as you want. We have hundreds. You can pass them out, wallpaper with them, anything that you want. But that would be a helpful tool, perhaps, for you. Open my eyes, let me see. God, we give you thanks for who you are. We give you thanks for your presence here in our midst. And we thank you for your sacrifice that allows us to enter your presence and to be in your kingdom. God, we are truly just honored and humbled that you choose us, that you want us, that you look down and say, yes, I want you to be a part of me and to be with me. We thank you for that choice that you made for us. And we love you in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to sing, and as we sing, you are welcome to sit, stand, kneel, however you would like. You can sing along or not sing along, just really whatever works for you in this moment. And Sammy and Kaylee, could I call upon you all to just get those trays moving, just send them in any direction, and take the bread and the cup as it comes. You can take it right away. You can hold on to it and take it in a little while. But we're going to just kind of worship as we remember, as we give thanks, and as we celebrate his body that was broken, and then his body that exists here with us. You can go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make that very clear. Go ahead and get those moving.
That it is finished.
St. Paul, could you turn this on? I don't think it's unmuted. Whichever one this is. The blinking one. The blinking one.
Hello. I just wanted to remind you guys that for the teens and parents of teens, this Friday night at my house, which is 411 South Michigan. It's right across from Catholic Church, that Petro Junction thing. I will be having a campfire and game night. We'll have an Xbox. I like board games. I have a ton of them. And also we'll be serving food. So we'll be roasting some hot dogs, some s'mores, all kinds of good stuff. So, if you'd like to come over to my house and hang out with each other, that would be great. This Friday, 6:30. Let me know if you think you're coming. Parents, let me know if you think your teenager would like to come hang out. That would be great.
Are adults allowed to come?
What?
Are adults allowed to come?
What?
Are adults allowed to come?
Yeah.
Sure.
If they meet with your approval, yes. Yeah, they have to. Adults you have to check with Ethan.
Do they have to like pass a background
A coolness
test?
test. Yes.
Okay.
Do you live in the Petro Junction?
I do not.
Okay, all right. I was confused. I was like, holy cow, that's really cool. That's really cool if you did. So anyway. All righty. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Acts chapter 8. Let's start at verse 26. Acts chapter 8, verse 26 is where we're going to be. So a few years ago, I think it was in the summer of 2007, but I'm not for sure, we did a mission trip to Philadelphia. Were you on that mission trip, Hannah?
I was not.
You were not. I'm sorry.
I was too young.
You were.
So
Are you sure?
I was probably in like 6th grade or so. I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't
Okay.
I think Allie was, but.
Okay. Now, how old are you in relationship to Bria?
She's a year younger.
She's a year younger. Okay. Because Bria got to go, but it's because her parents were
Right.
sponsors, and so she was so giddy. That's the only thing I remember. So I just remember some fun things from that trip. One, Bria just being so giddy, and where she was like attached to my hip almost half the time. She was so excited to be there, which was pretty funny. I remember Parker, your cousin Parker, and Parker, as only Parker can. One of the things we did was we wanted the kids to memorize Philippians 2, 1 through 11. And at some point during the week, everybody had to say it. And it was like everybody was doing it, and Parker was still trying to learn that sucker. And he was just struggling with it. And he finally did it with help from about 3 or 4 other people. I think whispering, you could hear it in the back. And so, just some very fun memories from that trip. We fed the homeless on that trip, which was a wonderful experience. But one of the things that I remember about that trip was that was the first time I was introduced to GPS. I think they were pretty new on the scene about that point. At least it was new to me. It had probably been around for a few years, but I had never used one at that point. Wasn't even real familiar with it. And so we're getting ready to go on this trip, and I did kind of the responsible youth minister thing. I got on MapQuest, and I went through our itinerary, and I printed off directions kind of for every scenario that I thought we were going to be facing. Not only how to get to where we're going and how to get back, but then also like there were a couple times we were taking trips, and I printed up those directions and made copies for everybody, and passed them out and whatnot. And I remember when I gave the copies to Brian Gogol, he said, "I'm good, I have GPS." And I'm like, "No, you need these directions." And he's like, "No, you don't understand, I have GPS." And I'm like, "Whatever, take the directions, And periodically we would kind of have, some confusion about where we're going, and I'd have to be going around communicating. And he would always say, "I'm fine, I have my GPS." Or he'd say, "Do you want me to lead? I have my GPS." And I'm like, "Dude, we have MapQuest directions. We don't need GPS." And but there was at one point in the trip where we were going downtown, and we're to where the the steps are that Rocky ran up, and when he kind of did the thing. Okay, so we were going down there to see that, and I had printed up directions for it, but something got messed up. And that's the thing about directions. They're only as good as long as you stay on that route. But if you get off the route, it's like you got to start figuring things out. And so we somehow got off the route, and I was like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And then right about that time, phone rings, ding-a-ling. It's Brian. He's like, let me take the lead. Just follow me. I have my GPS. I'm like, fine. I'm sick of hearing about this stupid GPS part. You just take the lead. And sure enough, he wound us around in places I didn't know where we were going, and boom, we popped out right where we needed to be. And I was like, holy cow, that was incredible. So then as we're parking, we were still a little ways away from where we needed to be, and we were trying to figure out how to get there. And he comes walking up, and it was one that you could detach from your vehicle. And he came up and he said, hey, I got my GPS, we can just carry it when we walk. And I have the address punched in, and it'll tell us right where to go. And I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, just listen to the GPS, and we'll get where we need to go. And I'm like, okay. And we did, and we were able to walk around, and we got right where we needed to go. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so that day I became a GPS believer. And we went and bought one, and we still use it. We have our old GPS course now. You have it on your phone, and so oftentimes we use that because our GPS, if it's any new construction, it's not going to get that. So I keep it in my car. But I still love that thing. We set it to where it was a woman's voice with a British accent. We call her Eunice. And and if we pull off somewhere and she keeps on saying, recalculating, turn around, shut up, Eunice, we know what we're doing, And but I'm a GPS believer now, because even when you get off track, it'll recalculate and it'll tell you where you need to go. And I still remember the first time we took a trip where we really put the GPS to the test, we had gone down to Elizabethtown, E-Town, to visit Jeff and Linda Knoll. And we were actually going over to my mom's house, but we went that way just to kind of say hi to them, visit for a bit. And then we were going to go over to southeastern Kentucky. Well, they're like 45 minutes to an hour south of Louisville, and then I live in southeastern Kentucky, and there's no good road for a direct route there. Basically, if you want the easy, convenient way, you go back up to Louisville, and then take the interstate over and 75 down, whatnot. But we were like, well, we'll just give it a whirl, see if the GPS tells us something different. We punched in the address, and sure enough, it said go this way, and it had us winding through these crazy places in southern Kentucky, and I thought, there is no way we're going to get where we need to go. And we'd be just in the middle of nowhere, and then we'd pop out right where we needed to be. And it was like it knew something that I didn't know. And I learned real quick, if I just listen to the GPS, I'm going to get where I need to go. But I got to listen to it, and I got to do what it says. But if I trust it and I listen to it, even if I don't know what I'm doing, it knows what I need to do, and I can follow and I can get where I need to be going. In general in life, we like to think that we're in charge, right? We like to think that we're in control, that we know where we're going, we know what we're doing. Hello. You can sit back there with your family. Okay, all right.
We were trying not to interrupt, but we obviously...
No, you're good. You're good. If Nathan Cruz is up here, now I'm warning you right now, he's going to be preaching a little bit later in the summer. If he was up here, whenever somebody comes in, what does he do? Oh yeah, he's like mid-sermon. Someone come in late from every time. Garrett Ethan always come in late from football practice. Hey, let's go, Ethan again! Hey! So anyway, no, you're all good.
She has an excuse. She was working.
Yeah, working hard. You're working? Very nice. Good job. All right. By the way, I know where you got your musical talent from because I was sitting next to your family and somebody had a good voice over there. I don't know who it was. I thought it was T-Ray, but I wonder, not that you don't. I just thought it was a man's voice, okay? So anyway, but in general, we like to think we're in charge. We like to think we're in control, that we know what we're doing, that we know where we're going, that we're kind of the captain of the fate, of our faith, the master of my soul. What's that saying? Something to that effect. And even in the church, we like to have that mindset, that we know what we're doing. Leadership books continually tell us we need to take control over situations, we need to take control over people, we need to take control and kind of make things happen the way we think it needs to be happening. Rick Warren, which I love Rick Warren, I love his books, but I even heard him say one time at a conference, this was at the North American Christian Convention a few years ago, and he just offhandedly made the statement. He said, if you want to grow a church, he said, I can tell you how to grow a church. And he said it so, and again, no disrespect to Rick Warren. I have been impacted by purpose-driven life and purpose-driven church. I respect his ministry and I love what he does. But he said that so off the cuff, I thought, that makes me feel uncomfortable. Because there's something about that just makes it sound like this man-made equation where you just plug in the numbers and boom, I can go to church. You want me to tell you how to go to church? I'll go to church and boom. And that we can make things happen the way we want them to happen. And yet, is that really the mindset that God calls us to when it comes to ministry in this world, ministry in his church, in our relationships with others? You know, does he really call us to that mindset that we just determine what things need to be and we just make it happen, we just take control of the situation? Is that his intention for how we relate to his world? So let's look at Acts 20, starting in Acts chapter 8, verse 26. I think this passage really speaks to this. And we're going to take it just a little chunk at a time. We're not going to read it all at once. So let's just look at 26 through 29a. And it says this. Then an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Get up and go toward the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a wilderness road." And so he got up and he went. Now there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of the Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, in charge of her entire treasury. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning home, seated in his chariot. He was reading the prophet Isaiah. And then the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over to this chariot and join it." Okay, so we're going to stop there. Now, Philip, for starters, Philip was one of the, last week we talked about the leaders that God appointed to the 7 deacons, 7 leaders he put in place to handle the situation that was going on in the church. Philip is one of those deacons, okay? There are 2 of them that became somewhat famous. Stephen, and he became famous because he died right after that. He developed such an effective, powerful ministry that he was the first Christian martyr, got stoned to death. We didn't look at that passage because I don't want you guys getting in any ideas in your head that you need to suffer for Jesus or anything, so we just skipped right over that one. That was a joke, by the way. Yeah, thank you, laugh, made me feel better. Okay. But Philip is also started to, this ministry of waiting on tables developed into something more. And we see him right before this section. He's down in Samaria. He's ministering. He's having just an effective ministry down there. Well, now what we see is God start to use him in this situation. But who is he called to minister to? Who does God lead Philip to minister to? It says an Ethiopian eunuch who was an official in the court of Candace, or the Candace. It's one of the officials, the queen of Ethiopia. The king was so devout, was so kind of, they almost worshipped the king. So it was the queen that really kind of took care of business. Kind of like in real life, right? You know, the king just kind of sits over there, feels like he's something, and it's the queen that's really taking care of things. So, but she's called the Candace, almost like in Egypt, called Pharaoh. You know, it's like a title. So anyway, so he is her treasurer. He's an official in her court, and he's described as a eunuch. Okay. Now here's the thing. So when I say eunuch, do you know what I mean by that? It means he has been castrated. If you're not sure what that means, I don't know if Ezra knows what that means. You can ask your mother after service. Okay? But anyway, something has been done to him. Possibly. Here's the thing. There's kind of some debate on what's really going on with this guy, because for him, he is the debate rages on because he is portrayed as being a follower of the God of the Jews. So part of Judaism in some shape or fashion. He is not. Most scholars don't think he is a Gentile in any shape or fashion, because a few chapters later, when Cornelius and his household become Christians, he is seen and he is recognized by the Christian community as that's the first Gentile conversion. So this guy can't be. He's somehow a part of the Jewish community. The problem is, in Deuteronomy, there is a command in there, I think it's chapter 23, but I'm not sure. There's probably a footnote in your Bibles. But it says that anyone who has had certain body parts crushed or damaged can't be a part of the people of Israel. And so there's debate whether he was a literal eunuch or not. Some think that he was a literal eunuch and he was only like a partial convert to Judaism, because they had those kind of at the time. Some people think that he literally was not castrated, that the title for eunuch, because they usually did that to court officials, that it can be associated just if you were a court official, you were called a eunuch. So it was more like a chamberlain or something like that, and that he hadn't really been castrated. Kind of like, you know, if you call someone a stud, you know, literally what a stud is is what? Like, a male horse that just, his only job is to, produce babies, and so when you call, if you called an adult male that, or a male of that, if I said, Ethan, you're such a stud, what I mean is you have a way with the ladies, right? I'm not meaning that he's literally a male horse that just reproduces for his livelihood, right? So sometimes words change in meaning because they kind of be associated with certain things. So eunuch possibly just means he's an official in the court, in her court, okay? So that's who he's dealing with. But here's the thing. Regardless of who he is, the impression here is that the gospel is starting to expand further outward, okay? It has started in Jerusalem and Judea. It started in the previous passage, which we didn't look at. It has expanded to Samaria. And now it's expanding out even further. And while this guy is part of the Jewish community, he's portrayed here as having returning from Jerusalem, having gone there to worship as a part of one of the Jewish festivals. He is still kind of on the outskirts of the community. He's living in Ethiopia. He's kind of in an exotic place. The gospel is expanding out geographically. It's expanding out culturally. That's the impression that's going on here, okay? And that's one of the big things going on with this text. But another thing that's going on that I want us to look at is that this expansion of the gospel and this scene that takes place here was not Philip's idea. It was not Philip's initiative. Philip's not really running anything right here. It's God that is initiating this process. And we see it in verse 26. It says that an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Go, get up and go down this road." Okay? Doesn't get any other instructions. Get up and go down this road. Then we get to verse 29. It says that the Spirit of the Lord told Philip, "Run up to that chariot. Go up to that chariot where you hear that guy reading the Bible. Okay? Go up there." And what we see is that this initiative is coming from God. And not only is the initiative, and so at this point, Philip's not really, he's not had a brilliant idea yet. He's not come up with a 5-year plan. He's not said, I'm going to go try to evangelize the travelers on the Gaza Road. It's none of that. He is following the lead of God's messenger, the angel, and God's Spirit. It's Philip. And what we see is not only is it the initiative of God, but we see the obedience of Philip. In fact, the way it's phrased is really interesting. It says, in verse 26, the angel of the Lord says, "Arise and go." In verse 27, it says, Philip arose and he went. And then in verse 29, it says, the Spirit tells him to go and join the chariot. And verse 30, it says, he ran up to the chariot. In fact, and it's phrased like that to demonstrate Philip's exact obedience. That Philip is being obedient he's following the cue of the Spirit and he's doing whatever God is leading him to do. That's the way in the Old Testament. You'll see that a lot where they'll say, God said this, and then the person did what was said in the next verse to demonstrate their obedience. Or in the case of Jonah, if you go to the story of Jonah, God said, "Arise and go to Nineveh," and the next verse said, Jonah arose and went to Tarshish. And it's phrased like that to demonstrate his disobedience. So it's phrased like that here to demonstrate Philip's obedience. And it's this kind of obedience to God's initiative that God uses and that God blesses and that God takes and then does amazing things that we couldn't have even planned for. I want to read to you just real quick. I've talked to you before about this Everyone series by N.T. Wright. I really like the story he tells just from his own life about this passage. I'm just going to read it real quick. He says this: "I was once visiting Cambridge." He's from England, so he's got a really cool accent if you ever get to him preach. "I was once visiting Cambridge, the English Cambridge, not the American one." Is there an American Cambridge? I didn't even know that. Anyway, to do some lectures. One afternoon, I was working on the themes for the lectures still to come when I found, to my surprise, an urgent thought in my head: go to Evensong at King's College. Now, I love choral evensong, but and I think that's just kind of an evening worship service where there's a lot of singing. That's my impression. I'm not really sure. Now, I love choral evensong, but I was going to be attending other services, and I had lots of work to do. And if I had been going to attend evensong, I might have thought of going to St. John's College, because their choir was the more famous at the time. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Back and back it came. Go to evensong at King's. So eventually, feeling rather foolish and not even sure what time the service was to be, I went. I arrived just at the last minute as the choir was about to process in. The massive chapel seemed to be absolutely full, mostly of Japanese tourists. Glancing around, I could only see one spare seat anywhere. Fortunately, it was on the end of a row. I hurried over and took the seat as the choir came in and the music began. As I sat down somewhat breathless, I felt a hand grip my arm. I looked around and saw to my astonishment an old friend, a New Testament scholar much older than myself, Bill Farmer from Dallas in Texas. "Tom Wright," he said, "what are you doing here?" He had no idea I was going to be in Cambridge. I lived in Litchfield at that time. "Bill," I replied, "what are you doing here?" I had no idea he was going to be in England, let alone in Cambridge, let alone in King's, and in that seat. The music had begun and we couldn't continue our conversation. Instead, he pulled out a small pocket diary, and in the space for that date, he had written 3 words in block capitals: "Call Tom Wright." We stared at it in amazement. Bill, who was now gone to his rest, was a man of faith and prayer. He hadn't phoned, but the call had gotten through anyway. I love that, and he goes on to tell how that this guy was putting on a conference, and he felt led to ask Tom Wright to speak at it, but he wasn't sure, and he hadn't pursued that. Sorry, I have a sneeze coming up. Excuse me. And so he hadn't pursued that call, and yet God initiated that conversation in that meeting so they could talk about that, and Tom did accept that engagement, and God really used that for his kingdom and for his glory. And who knows if that would even happen. I mean, it's not the same as exciting thing as this, because all he had to do was pick up the phone. And yet who knows if he had done that, who knows if N.T. Wright would have taken that seriously when he heard it. And yet it was so apparent that God had orchestrated their meeting, that God used that to do further ministry. And that's what happens when we listen to the Spirit of God. God accomplishes things that we may have never intended and never saw on the radar. So anyway, let's keep moving. We're gonna move a little faster now, but it says this, picking up in verse 30. Well, I'll start with 29. Then the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over to this chariot and join it." And so Philip ran up to it and heard him reading the prophet Isaiah. Back then they would read out loud. That's the way they read. He asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" He replied, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to get in and sit beside him. And now the passage of the scripture that he was reading was this: "Like a sheep, he was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb silent before its shearer, so he does not open his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth." The eunuch asked Philip, "About whom, may I ask you, does this prophet say this? About himself or about someone else?" And then Philip began to speak, and starting with this scripture, he proclaimed to him the good news about Jesus. So we see this scene continue, and we see Philip run up there. And so the question is, when Philip goes up there, I mean, now that God's kind of opened this door, Philip kind of takes over, right? And what we see is that's not the case. Philip goes up there, and while it doesn't say the Spirit led this, the Spirit did that, we see God's hand all over it. That God has led this guy to be reading from the prophet Isaiah about a passage that's very specifically about the Jewish Messiah. And when Philip goes up there, all he does is he just asks a question. Do you know what you're reading? And from that point on, it's like Philip is just kind of responding to what's already going on. The guy says, "How can I?" if someone doesn't explain to me. Will you come up here and talk with me through this? And then even when he talks to him about it, he listens to the passage first. And Polly actually pointed this out to me. We mentioned this passage to me about a month or so ago. He starts with the passage, and then he leads him from there to talk about Jesus. He starts where that guy is and leads him to talk about Jesus. And again, what we see is Philip's not running anything. He's responding to what God is already doing, what God already has in motion. And he allows God to orchestrate that whole encounter. And here's the thing that I keep coming back to. I just keep thinking, what if we were that sensitive to the Spirit of God? What if we were that sensitive to what God was doing? What if when God impressed things upon our heart or our spirit or said something almost audibly in our mind, and he said, "Go do this," or "Go do that," what if we just went and did it? And when we got to that situation, what if we had our antennas up? Rather than just trying to take control, what if we instead had our antennas up to see, okay, God, you led me here. You must know why. You may already be doing something. What's going on here? And look for evidences of where God is already working and what God is already doing. And then simply responded to what's going on here and steered that conversation or that individual. Kind of started with where they are and then directed them towards Jesus. Or started with that situation right where it is and directed them towards Jesus. Rather than showing up with our own agenda or our own prefabbed conversation, bullet points or whatnot, to try to get someone to believe the same thing we do, or get someone to do what we think they need to do, or shape a group of people to make them exactly the way we think that they're supposed to be. What if we instead trusted that God loved that individual or loved those people or loved that group of people more than we do, and God wants what's best for them more than we do, and God may already be there doing his thing, and instead he is simply inviting us to be a part of what he's already doing, he's already at work at. You know, a number of years ago, it was the rage to do the study Experiencing God by Henry Blackaby. That's one that's, if you've never done it, it's worth doing, just because it was written 20 years ago. It's still good stuff. But there's just some principles that were very impactful on me from that. And one of the things he just emphasized over and over again is that our job is to look to see where God is working and then join him there. You know, it's the idea that it doesn't hang on us, that God's at work, and that we just need to take our cues from him and let him lead us in that. And trust that what he's doing is the right thing to do, that he knows what he needs to get done, and that we just need to follow his lead on that. Let's keep reading. Verses 36 through 40. It says this: As they were going along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, here's water. What is to prevent me from being baptized?" He commanded the chariot to stop, and both of them, Philip and the eunuch, went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. And when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away. The eunuch saw him no more, and he went on his way rejoicing. But Philip found himself at Azotus, and as he was passing through the region, he proclaimed the good news to all the towns until he came to Caesarea. Okay, so now the hard part's over, right? Philip, again, should kind of take over. And what we see is that doesn't happen. I mean, even the idea to get baptized, that Philip doesn't even say, "Hey, don't you want to get baptized?" And I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever initiate things like that, but because sometimes God leads us to do that. But what we see here is Philip doesn't even do that. It comes from the Ethiopian eunuch. He's like, "There's water. What's preventing me from getting baptized?" I can't think of anything. And so he baptized him. And then at that point, the Spirit snatches him away. He finds himself in another place. It's like warp zone type thing, okay? And he doesn't dwell on the past. He doesn't think, "Oh, I wasn't done discipling the eunuch. Oh, man, I wanted to relish in just the excitement of that moment." He's thinking, "Okay, this is where God wants me, but I'm trying to get to Caesarea, so I'm heading to Caesarea, but I'm going to preach to everybody I come to on my way there." And so he just picks up ministering wherever he is, assuming that God has him there for a reason, and he's going to be faithful to that purpose. Again, we see the Spirit of God leading him, and he's just following that lead wherever he finds himself. In the office where my dad worked when I was a kid, there was a banner that hung that I loved, and it had a quote on it. I can't remember exactly, but it was something to the effect of, "The sign of God's leading is that we end up somewhere we never intended to go." Which I love that, because that's so often the truth of the matter. That when we really follow God's leading, sometimes it's like, this wasn't on my 5-year plan. This wasn't even on my 1-year plan. But yet here I am. And I'm not saying it's bad to come up with a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan or a 15-year plan, because God can use those too. But I tell you this right now, this was not part of my 5-year plan. It wasn't even part of my 1-year plan last year. And yet this is where God's leading. And you guys have those things in your life as well. That God is wanting to lead you somewhere, and he might not have given you all the details yet. And yet when that time comes, he's going to speak to you, and he's asking us to be obedient. So what does this mean for us? And I think to answer that question, I think where we have to start is to admit that stories like this and passages like this are just a bit of an affront to us. That they challenge something that's very precious to us, which is kind of our own self-reliance, our own kind of control of our own destiny. I mean, that is an American virtue, especially in the West, that we are in charge and we can make this happen of our own initiative, of our own effort. And to be honest, a passage like this, even when it comes to ministry, can be just an affront to us. We're like, man, I don't know that I like that. I don't know that I want to be at the whim of anybody, even God. And so it's hard for us to respond like that. But the reality is, when it comes to ministry, we bring that mindset even into ministry sometimes, and that can be a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, when we have some success, we want to say, hey, look at what I did. Hey, look at what I said. Look at this person who came to Christ. I mean, sometimes, I've had this ask me, how many people you led to Christ? It's kind of like, kind of like in the Old West when you kill someone, you put a notch on your belt. And, I've heard Christians almost talk with that language. It's like when I lead someone to Christ, put a notch on my belt. I got 12, that I led to Christ. And it's this pride, like I've done it. Like I've made this happen. Or if a program happens, or if some ministry effort happens, it's like, look at what I did. And it's a source of pride. And then on the flip side, if there's some sort of failure or things don't turn out the way you want them to, there's this an immense sense of shame and guilt. Oh my gosh, I failed God. Even though I did what I thought I was supposed to be doing, oh my gosh. And I'm not sure what went wrong. Man, I said all the right things to this person. They still, they're not following Jesus yet. What's my problem? What am I doing wrong? And there's this sense of, gosh, it's my fault. It's on me. And the reality is that's not the case. I heard tell of a church. This was a couple hours away. So nothing around here. But they were a very successful church, just a really neat church, and they are a really neat church. But I heard that for a while there they had a pastor that was a little bit tyrannical and just was obsessed with their church growing, to the point that supposedly if their numbers dipped at all, their attendance numbers dipped at all, or if something didn't go the way he thought, he would just, at their Monday morning staff meeting, he would just scream and berate his staff, to get their numbers up or to fix this. And I just thought, and it's that mindset of this hinges on us. And that's not what this is teaching us. That God's at work and we have to trust his lead. So what should we be doing according to this passage? I think the challenge of this passage is that it starts with listening. We have to learn to listen. And that's why prayer is so important. That prayer time is so important. Not because we have all these things that we need to ask of God, although that's important too, but because part of prayer, part is communication, part of communication is listening, right? I mean, if you had if you're in a relationship with your spouse and you're always talking and they're never saying anything, chances are there's a breakdown in communication. That they might be thinking things and they just don't want to tell you. Sometimes Jennifer gets frustrated with me when we get in a fight because she's like, I am just waiting for you to stop talking, right? And because that communication is a two-way street. And the same thing with prayer. And when we come into those times of prayer, part of our agenda, our goal at that point is to listen to what God is trying to say to us. And if we'll listen, he'll let us know when he wants us to do something. But we have to cultivate that, learning to listen to the Spirit of God. The first church that we served at, up in the south suburbs of Chicago, there was a guy in the church. There was the mother campus that planted the church where I worked at. There was a guy in the church, and his name was David Griesmer. And we were told about him when we first got there. And Dave Griesmer was just kind of an interesting guy. He was not a believer. I think he was either an atheist or an agnostic, I think. But he certainly was not a believer. But he had such a connection with the church. For starters, his wife was one of the secretaries. Wonderful, wonderful woman. We love the secretaries up there. I'd go in there and throw stuff at them. I just really love the relationship we had with the secretaries. But she was one of the secretaries, just beautiful, beautiful person. And they had a wonderful marriage, but he wasn't a believer. But then he also played with their worship team, which, to be honest, and they had some reservations with this too. I have serious reservations with non-Christians playing or helping lead worship simply because of their talents. And I think they had some reservations too, and yet they felt like God was leading them to allow him to do that. And he was wonderful to work with. He was a wonderful musician. He was the band director at one of the high schools, and he played trumpet and could just never use music, make things up on the spot. And in fact, one time the drummer was sick and didn't show, And he's like, that's all right, I'll play drums, which they thought that meant he would play drums. Oh no, he played trumpet and drums at the same time. I mean, that's just kind of, and making up stuff the whole way on the trumpet, you know, and just playing one-handed with the drums. And they said it was absolutely phenomenal. Probably a little distracting, but absolutely phenomenal. And, but he wasn't a believer. He would sit in their Sunday school class, he would come to worship, but he wasn't a believer. He was good friends, he's pretty good friends with the pastor, because he was an excellent golfer. And the pastor loved to golf, and so they would golf together and stuff like that. So he had a good relationship with the pastor, but he wasn't a believer. We had a revival speaker come to town, and a lot of people must have said something to the revival speaker. I think they did, maybe they didn't. But at some point he saw Dave Griesemer and he said, God wants us to talk. That's not kind of what you're talking about. But, and I don't know if a conversation happened before this, but I think it was the second night of the revival, the preacher spoke, and afterwards he gave an invitation to salvation. And as we were playing that first song of the songs during that invitation time, David Griesemer comes walking up, tugs on Earl Ferguson's arm and says, I want to give my life to Christ. And when we stopped, we kind of stopped so Earl could kind of tell what happened. And Earl, I never saw him cry before, but he got so choked he could hardly spit out the words. He said, David Griesemer has come tonight to give his life to Christ. And you could hear an audible gasp in the room. It was kind of one of these, because everybody knew David Griesemer, and they knew he wasn't a believer, and they never thought that would happen. And yet he gave his life to Christ that night, and he just he took off. He was on fire. He, as a family, they took off. A few years later, come to find out, he became an elder in the church, and as far as I know, he's continuing to serve the Lord faithfully. But here's my question in all of that. What brought about his conversion? Was it his wife faithfully loving him and praying for him all those years? For 30 years, if I remember correctly, is what she said. Was it the worship team following the spirit of the Spirit's urging and allowing him to be a part of the worship team, even though that was a little bit unorthodox? Was it the pastor befriending him, you know, regardless of his faith preference? Was it the fact that he sat through the sermons and the Sunday school lessons and just entered into the life of the church and the people welcomed him even though he wasn't really a believer? Was it the evangelist who said, hey, you know, we need to talk, and then spoke truth into his life? Well, I think it was all of those things, right? Because at every step of the way, the Spirit of God was leading his people to love this guy and minister to this guy just as he needed to be loved and ministered to at that moment. And he'll do the same thing with us. And yes, it's always exciting when you get to be the one that's there when the deal is closed, right? I still remember people that I've gotten to talk with, have that conversation with, and it is always exciting. But you know what? Sometimes you're doing the easy work. The real work was done long ago when people kept sowing and sowing and sowing into this person's life. But God uses all of that to accomplish his purposes. But we have to trust that he is at work and that he knows what he's doing. And if we will just listen to him, that he'll let us know what he wants us to do at that moment. But it starts with listening. Let's pray. God, I thank you. I thank you that when it comes to ministering for you, when it comes to ministering on your behalf, God, I thank you that you don't just leave us to figure it out. That so often when we get to a situation, we find out that you've already been there. You're already at work. And you're simply inviting us to be a part of what you're already doing. And I thank you for that. I thank you that you speak to us about the things that you want us to do. God, give us ears to listen. Give us ears to hear. Help us slow down long enough to hear what you would say to us. And then, God, give us obedient hearts to do what you're asking us, whether it's big or small, whether it's foolish or rational, whatever it is. Help us to follow your lead. And as that happens, God, I pray that we'll see miracles happen along the way, little ones and big ones. But nevertheless, fingerprints, footprints of your presence in the lives of those around us, because you've chosen to work through us. And God, if there is anyone here who does not know you, and they want that kind of relationship with you, that kind of relationship that you can speak into their lives, God, I pray that you'll lead them to talk to me or to someone afterwards to find out what it means to give their life to you and to have that kind of personal relationship with you. God, we love you in Jesus' name. Amen. I'll include myself there, that we really want to hold on to or plan or make happen. But maybe God is saying tonight, I got this, I know what I'm doing, just forget your plans and listen. Maybe it's one big specific thing that He has for you tonight to remind you of His sovereignty and His goodness and His plan. Or maybe it's just a bunch of little things along the way. I was listening to a podcast this week by a mom, and she was just talking about her need to control every detail of her kids' moments, like sit in that chair, no, sit in that chair, no. And she said, I'm exhausted, they're exhausted, we're all mad, I don't need to be in control. And it was just a good reminder to me of all those little things that really do not matter and how I attempt to control those. And so maybe that's kind of what He has for you tonight, just all those little things combined. But whichever it is, or maybe a combination of both, just allow His Spirit to speak to you a message of letting go and allowing Him to work and of listening to what it is He's saying.
to share, what you feel like God is leading you to really give over to Him. It's totally fine if you don't want to, and the silence is not scary to us, so don't be worried if no one wants to, but would anyone like to? If you realize later that you would like to share, just stick that on the Facebook page. That only goes to the people that are in our group, and if you'd like us to be praying for that, that's a place you're welcome to communicate that kind of thing too. So feel free to do that.
Your presence is a promise, for I You will lift my head above the mighty waves. You are able to keep me from stumbling. And in my weakness, you are the strength that comes from within. Good shepherd of my soul, take my hand and lead me on. You make my footsteps and my path secure. So walking on water is just the beginning. Cause my faith to rise, stand at attention. For you are calling me to greater things. You will lift my head above the mighty waves. You are able to keep me from stumbling. And in my weakness, you are the strength that comes from within. Good shepherd of my soul, take my hand and lead me on. Oh, how I love you, how I love you. You have not forsaken me. Oh, how I love you, how I love you. With you is where I want to be. Oh, how I love you, how I love you. You have not forsaken me. Oh, how I love you, how I love you. You is where I want to be. You will lift my head above the mighty waves. You are able to keep me from stumbling. And in my weakness, you are the strength that comes from within. Good shepherd of my soul, take my hand and lead me on. God, we love you and we trust you and we look for you to work this week as we listen each day. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week.
I totally forgot. Y'all need to dress up tomorrow. Me and Bob. That's right. That's right. Or at least you weren't listening. The Spirit of God was telling you. Blue shirts, jackets.